to the Sales Influence Podcast, where we talk about finding the why and how people buy. I'm your host, Victor Antonio. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for lending me those wonderful ears. And if you're watching us on YouTube, thank you for the eyeballs. Today, I have the great Jim Dickie with us. Right. Jim, how are you doing this morning?
Doing excellent, Victor. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Introduce yourself to the Sales Influence crowd. Let them know who you are, Jim.
Well, I'm a salesperson by professional background. Interesting enough, my bachelor's and master's were in counseling. I have never had business.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but IBM had a program way back when I got out of grad school. They said, we want you to go and come to work for us. And I said, in HR? And they said, no, you're not qualified. And they said, we want you to go into sales. And I said, what's sales? And they said, what's counseling? And I said, I asked a lot of questions, like how long has it been like that? And what would better look like? And what's standing in the way of progress? So give it a shot. So that's how I got into technology, got into sales, and got into research 24 years ago when I sold my third software company, just to go and find out what are the actual primary research metrics around sales. You know, what are the challenges facing sales teams, why those problems exist? But more importantly, what do you do about it? How do you leverage people, process, technology, and knowledge? And that's been really just fascinating for us because we've seen things where the economy's good, the economy's bad, but salespeople are resilient. They find a way to keep doing business. And so it's just interesting now in this really black swan event to kind of figure out what's going to be happening now going forward.
Yeah. I did not know you came from counseling. So that by itself is just a joke in and of itself. You know that. I'm sure you've heard this many times, right?
Yep.
But talk to me about because I want entrepreneurs to understand your background, that you just, you have some real experiences. Talk to me about the software company, the last one you sold. What was it? How did you build a company? What were some of the challenges building a company before we get into the other stuff? Sure.
I actually did companies with three other partners. And so our goal was to sell the company versus to sell the product. So we would get it up to, 25, 35 million revenues and sell it and go do something else. But they were all in the high tech space. So they were all software firms. Novell bought the first one, Teradyne out of Boston bought the second one, HP bought the third. But they were always the thing of, let's go through and not just have the CIO worry about debugging the product. I was running sales and marketing in most cases, so I had to debug the process. I had to figure out what was the buying cycle look like, what was the customer's journey look like, and sit there and turn over not just a well-tested product, but an install base, referenceable accounts, those types of things. So some other larger company could take it to the next step.
That's amazing. I have not heard the name Teradyne in such a long time.
They joined the S&P 500 this year.
Did they? I remember my first engineering company was Honeywell, and we used Teradyne system at their electronic test centers. So I just haven't heard that name in a while. What are some of the differences? I mean, you have history. And I love the fact that you have real world application. Talk about selling then, let's go 20 years ago, and then selling now. I know there's some obvious differences, but I don't know, from your perspective, what do you see?
There's a huge difference, that people have been talking about, folks like Challenger have been talking about, things are happening later in the sales cycle. But there's also, as implications of what AI is going to do to this. So let's go back 20 years. When I was running sales organizations, what I did was I was hiring people who were product experts, who were really good at persuasion, who were really good at motivation. And so we'd sit there and say, you go out, but you had an advantage back then because in order to get information about the product, you had to talk to my salesperson. Well, then the internet came along the last 20 years. And now there's tons of information out there that's available to the customer. So if all you're doing is regurgitating things that they can get online, where's your value at? And I think that's been the real challenge for a lot of sales organizations right now. Especially, we just did a survey and we said, okay, you're coming out of the worst of the COVID. Hopefully, we're trying to restart the engine. What are you going to focus on? And the number one thing is we've got to improve our value messaging. In a lot of cases now, the CFO has become the CF no. And I get it. No, I'm not going to do it. No, you can't. No, can we wait? No. And so in order to get them to say yes, you've got to present that business case. This is why this is imperative for the company to invest now. I don't care if it's in manufacturing, customer services, marketing, sales, whatever. People are going back through and they're making investments based on, am I working with somebody who will help me? And there was a fascinating study done by CSO Insights right before I left, where they went out and interviewed 500 B2B buyers. And they asked the question, Are you involving salespeople later in the process than you used to? And everybody said yes. And then they asked another question, is there anything that would make you involve a salesperson earlier in the process? And only 9% said, no, there's nothing, which meant 91% said there is something. And so I went back and said, okay, what would motivate you? And it really fell into 3 buckets. The first one is, if this is new to me, I'm happy to involve somebody who can help educate me. Second one was, if this is risky to me personally, I'm very interested in involving a sales professional to help me mitigate my risk. And by the way, if this is complex, where I've got to go build consensus across the rest of the enterprise, I'd like a partner to help me do that. So the buyers were telling us, here are things that you could do, but it's beyond the product. And so the thing is, do you have a sales organization that's in a position to do that? That's a consultative type of sell.
Right.
Coming from background, I get it.
I was going to ask, because you'll have the historical perspective, and I mean that in a positive sense, because I think we're about the same age. And that is, when you look at Mac Hannon's book, Consultative Selling, I think it was 1970 it came out. And I think it's a seminal work. I still think it's as valuable today as it was then. And so what do you see? Give me some, put that in context. Has it changed? Consultative selling, has it really evolved?
Well, I think we're at the point where it's going to evolve. So let me give you an example of what's going on that we're seeing. So I came across an AI company out of Los Angeles that's focusing on aggregating IoT data from all different sources for just agriculture business. So, there are satellites that are flying over the earth right now, and they're measuring the temperature. So I can actually tell you what the temperature in a field is in Australia. There are drones that are flying over fields. They're collecting moisture content data. There are sensors on John Deere tractors. And as they go up and down the rows, they're collecting data on things like infestation. So you've got bugs, but don't spray the entire field. It's just this little quadrants where we're finding it. And so what they're saying is, let's take all of this data and let's aggregate it and let's apply it to agri-loan companies. So the Farm Credit Services out of Omaha, they just work exclusively with farmers. So before, when I would go in and I would sit there and say, hey, Victor, tell me about your farm. Now I go in and say, hey, Victor, let me tell you about your farm. We've got all this data. Now, when we started the season and we set up your line of credit for the harvesting, we decided that you were going to plant it the last week in March. Well, we had a wet spring, so you were 3 weeks late going into April. And by the way, you were going to do soybeans. You're expecting 100% yield from last year. It looks like it's going to be 93%. And based on the coldness, we think it's going to be a late harvest. And so we want to extend your line of credit from the end of November to the end of January to not put pressure on you. And by the way, we have some suggestions for equipment that you ought to be taking a look at for next year. That's amazing. A totally different conversation.
Yep.
That's
I was going to say for my listeners, just to do the basics here, IoT, Internet of Things, devices now.
Internet of Things.
Yeah, Internet of Things. Things can now have things where sensors, you send data, telemetry, whatever it may be, and the aggregation, obviously, through satellites and other different collection technology. And to be able to analyze all that data and now have that information front and center when you're having the conversation, or in this case, when you're about to give out a loan, instead of saying, tell me about your farm, I'll tell you everything you need to know about your farm. That's a big shift, isn't it? That's a big shift in the industry of selling. So that's one big change. But you highlighted something. You said there are 3 things that the new salesperson has to have. You talk about or when the buyer will bring you into the cycle early. And that you said, if it's new and I need education, come on in. If it's risky, I want to mitigate risk. Come on, I want to talk to you. And the last one is, if I got to build consensus because it's a complex situation involving multiple departments, bring that salesperson in. How many salespeople today, I mean, literally, can do those 3 things? When I look at B2B, what I see are surface salespeople. Argue with me on that, Jim. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just jaded.
I don't know that you are, Victor. I think we haven't had to have that push yet for a while. I was on with the Sales Executive or Sales Enablement Society virtual conference last week. I was on with Scott Satushi and Tamara Shank, and Rob Peterson. And they said, what are you seeing in the world today? And, what's this year compared to last year? And I said, last year was a great year. We had a great economy worldwide. I said, but in a hurricane, even turkeys can fly. Mm-hmm. And so now the wind has stopped and we're going to find out, can you make that shift or not?
Yeah.
Or were you selling in spite of what you're doing, not because of what you were doing? And I think Kate Katowski, when she was over at GE, she's now over at Amazon Web Services, head of sales enablement. But when I talked to her over at GE, she said, we're investigating the salesperson going forward. And we think that sales skills will be important, but business skills are more important. And she pointed to the folks within GE that are part of the audit program, where they go in and audit a business like GE Water or GE Power. And they come out of that program a year or two later, and they've got business skills. They can read a balance sheet. They understand customer outcomes, understand shareholder value. And she says, I want to marry those two together, where you've got the business skills and the sales skills. But in addition to persuasion, I want you to have collaboration and co-creation. And I think that's going to be the thing going forward, where you'll see people have to shift and move into that new role, and they'll either be able to do it or not. And I think a lot of people may not be able to.
Yeah, I think it might be a challenge. Later on today, I get to interview Brent Adamson. So that's going to be a fun interview. And I remember reading a paper by Gartner where they were talking about I don't want to call it the attrition of B2B salespeople, but how the customer journey, more people are going on their own customer journey and finding solution themselves before they actually call somebody in. And so if we do need business metrics, right, I think salespeople should be more business oriented. In a complex sell B2B, they need to be more business oriented. We're moving away from persuasion and influence, so to speak, to make it tangible, make it real, help mitigate the risk, as you said, reduce my anxiety, increase my certainty, help me build a case. And so in today's training, like, for example, your sales mastery, what do you guys do to help salespeople develop those skills?
We're really saying to folks, and we're working with a couple of software companies right now, saying the sales process is here for one reason and one reason only. It's here to support the buying process. Because you can go through the sales process and you can do everything except for one thing. You can't legally sign the contract for the customer. They have to sign it. And so I think the major thing is, are we taking time to really go out and understand what's going on the buyer side? It's interesting. I found a company out of India that's doing sell cycle analysis and buy cycle analysis with AI. And so before, we used to do it where we would call the salesperson and say, tell me what happened on this deal, win, loss, no decision. We'd call the customer and say, what happened on your side? We try to piece it together. And it was labor intensive, and it was, sometimes biased because, if you told me the product was ugly and I'm the product manager, of course that can't be right.
Very subjective, very subjective.
Yeah. But what this thing now is that AI is calling the people after a deal. And so I can do analysis of past deals, wins, losses, no decisions to scale. And it doesn't ask, for example, if it's interviewing the rep, it doesn't ask you things I already know. Like I can go into CRM and see what you pitched.
But wait a minute, wait. This is really interesting, Jim. So wait a minute, who does the actual calling?
AI.
That's what I thought you said. AI, and I go, it actually does the calling.
And it sends them a message and says, answer this question. And they type in the answer. So it calls them on their cell phone. They just text back on the thing. But it's calling, but it already knows things because it can go into ERP, it can go into CRM, it can say, okay, I already know what the deal was. I know what the competitor was. I know what the pricing was. What was the business issue that caused them to bring you into the first? I'm going to ask you things I don't know. And to think about that, being able to do that to scale for every deal, you're going to start really getting in these perspectives on what's going on. And just saying, right now we're in a period where, I don't know what anybody did in their sales kickoff meeting at the beginning of 2020, but I know their salespeople aren't executing on that plan today.
Yeah, you're blowing my mind here, Jim. I know a little bit about AI. But that one blew my mind because you're saying that the algorithm is going to go into the ERP or the CRM system, the platforms, whatever they're using, right? Look at what's there and go, what am I missing? And almost do a subtractive thing. And let me go ask those questions.
It's not an hour-long conversation. It's minutes long because I'm looking for the few other details. And the key thing, I'll send you a link to this thing. It'll blow your mind. It produces a heat map of how you stack up against different competitors. And so it says, okay, here's what happens when you go against competitor A and you have a 20% win rate. Here's what happens when you go up with competitor B and you have a 90% win rate. And it starts to give you feedback on what to do. And so it gives you directions the next time around. Unless you can get nursing involved at step 3 in the sales cycle, if you're 3 in medical products, don't go forward. You're going to lose because purchasing is going to make the decision. Purchasing doesn't like us. We're the most expensive. Nursing loves us because we're the most reliable, easiest to administer, and have the fewest side effects. So it starts picking up all these things from all of these deals. So, I always joke about the fact that the answer to every sales challenge we've already faced probably already exists within the company. I just got to find it and share it. And now I can.
That's interesting. So how would you, now when you look at, okay, so the algorithm is pointing you in certain directions, right? Telling you where you're winning the deals, losing the deals based on the heat map. How do we tie that in, or how do they tie that back into the training and coaching piece with a sales enablement platform or something? Make that connection for me.
Yeah, I think it's a really good thing. Now we're making decisions based on metrics versus hunches. So I can get this information, I can start passing it back on to marketing to begin with. And just say, okay, pricing wasn't an issue. Now it is. Okay, why? So I can point you to exactly, here's the issues that are going on there. We then change the way that they develop the marketing content that we use. That goes into the training courses. We need to go out and not have this thing of, let's go do, at the sales kickoff, let's have a session on pricing. No, let's have one now. Let's do it today. And let's have a little micro course on this little thing. Let's also have the managers coach differently, because I'm going to be able to go and using things like Chorus or Einstein coaching now or Gong, actually go and figure out who's having problems with the pricing thing and who's not. And let's do coaching by exception. So I think now there's a ton of data that says we can bring a whole bunch of science to the art of selling that we've never been able to do before, but it's also selling at the speed of change. Because right now we're being bombarded. We just did a mini study and we said, how much change is bombarding your sales organization in different factors? And is it a good thing or a bad thing? And it's like, okay, well, the changes in the economy was hitting everybody, but to most people it was bad. For somebody like Zoom, it was great. Marriott Corporation, not so much. But there were changes in the competitive landscape, changes in the political environment, changes in global competition. And then there were self-inflicted changes, like we changed our product line, we enhance it, we expand it, all those things are new changes that our salespeople have to adapt to. And we've got to be doing it. We've got to be able to make those changes at the speed of change versus saying, let's get around to it. Right now, I don't know what's going to happen. Do we have a vaccine or not for COVID? If not, how long do we shut down governments? Everybody has to react to all these things that are going on. Breex has been going through this for years over in the UK. What the hell's going to happen? And you've got to adjust. And I think adaptability and agility are the two watchwords for sales going forward.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, that the AI is trying to keep up with that change, because we as human beings, this processing power we have up here just can't do it. And so we need the machines. And you said two things I love what you're about to say. One, you said is coaching by exception. Let the machine guide us, so to speak, into telling us where do we need to coach and where do we need to be effective. I wanted to ask you something, because I don't hear this topic talked about a lot. It's a simple concept, but nobody talks about it. A content management system. You talk about how, the AI system will tell you basically, here's where we're missing the deals. It wasn't pricing. It was something else, the value messaging. And then we go over to marketing and says, hey, we need this. Talk about content management systems, because that's a rare topic. Nobody really touches on that. Where do you see that going?
It started off, and it used to be, we're document management things. So what we got to do is we got all of these sources of things. Let's put all the things we ever wrote, anytime, any place, and put them all in one place. And so let's take SharePoint, for example, years ago. We're just going to dump it in Microsoft SharePoint. Well, then you start having multiple versions of SharePoint. And by the way, are we using this? Is the customer reacting to it? Because again, we live in a frail ecosystem. So you have a great case study. It's doing really, really well. And then all of a sudden you're talking about the great relationship and how great you've supported Volkswagen. Then they get caught with their engineers fudging the emissions data. Nobody wants to touch them. They're toxic. Well, that's an extreme example, but there are things that happen all the time where a piece of content was effective. Now it's not. And I think that's the thing that we've got to start doing, is start realizing we not only have to do a better job of analyzing, is it content being shared? First off, a lot of salespeople, hey, are you selling that new product? Yeah, Victor, I am. Well, how come you've never sent any of the new brochures to any prospect? You're staying in your comfort zone, man. You're hosing me. So are you using the content? Is it resonating? And what else? And what are they sharing with other people? If we just started doing those things, that would be huge. And I think the technology is there to do that. But it's also the type of thing that says, let's go back through and really be allowing customers to consume things at their own pace. I love some of the things, for example, like that Seismic's doing, is that when they send out, collateral, you don't have to go through each one of the pages in the piece. You can navigate. If all of a sudden you see something, I want to go deeper, you just tag on that and it'll go deeper into that piece of information. So it allows you to consume at your own pace. And I think also edutainment is especially what millennials want. They want to be edutained. I don't want to be reading manuals that thick. I want to be on something like this, where maybe there's a white paper that goes deeper into a topic. But I want to get access to things. And by the way, I want to get access to everything I need to do what I want to do right now and nothing else. I do not want to be bombarded. And I think that's the issue that content management needs to start dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's it, because it's almost like the salesperson is the bottleneck, right? Because I can see the machines creating great content with marketing, of course, right? But to me, the salesperson is always the single point of failure trying to get it to the buyer in the market. Because as you say, have you sold a new product? Yeah, I have. But you haven't sent out the brochures, the comfort zone. And so I think that's why customers are going on their own journey. It's too complex. And sometimes I think salespeople are not wired that way, which where the enablement platforms come from to begin to guide us. So the bigger question, if we have the content on one side, Jim, we definitely need that content to be fed into this enablement platform that really guides a salesperson. Talk to me about this. There's this evolution in sales enablement. It's quiet, but it's rumbling, and I can hear it. Right? That we are now becoming, I like to use the word sales cyborgs, right? It's a salesperson with the machine selling. And we're becoming more dependent on these platforms. Talk to me about that and where that's going.
Well, I think there are two aspects to that, Victor. The one is that, I need help getting the right information on things. So let's take a look at Cardinal Health. They're a medical products firm. They represent 300 manufacturers. They can sell 30,000 SKUs. Okay, what salesperson is going to know 30,000 SKUs? 3,000, 300, 30. So I need technology to be coaching me. And I think that's one of the things that content management could do, is based on you starting to describe things, it's going to say, hey, here's the stuff to use. And by the way, here's the stuff to use by persona at different stages in the sales process. So if I'm selling watches and somebody says, what do you sell to keep track of time? At the beginning of the sales cycle, I'm going to say, here's a picture of my watch. At the end of the sales cycle, I want to talk about, and it's tied into the nuclear clock in the UK, and it's accurate by 0.00001 milliseconds per millennial. It's a different thing because people want different information at stages. So I think it's also guiding things like that. And I had an interesting experience a couple of years ago. They were talking to me about when I said, I want to see some really cool case studies around content management. And everybody kept saying, you got to meet this guy named Renee down at Getty Images in Australia. And I said, okay. So, I set up, I requested an interview with him, do a case study on him. I called the guy. Now, I have totally blown time zone changes, but he accepted my thing. So when he answers the phone, I go, hello. And I go, Renee, Jim Dickie, sales manager. I said, what time is it there? And he says, 4 a.m. And I said, why did you take a phone call from me at 4 a.m.? And he says, I'm up early because we're talking to people all around the country, and I'm really fascinated by this. And I said, okay, what's cool about what you did? And he says, we got rid of the needs analysis process. And I go, what do you mean you got rid of the needs analysis process? I mean, that's like discovery is what, I'm thinking of that. That's what a rep does. And he says, yeah, our reps don't have to do that anymore. Technology is helping them do that. And I said, tell me more. And he said, they built a system. So I'm thinking, my wife's a photographer.
That's okay to mind, by the way. That's okay to mind when you said that.
And they said, you have no idea what we can do. He says, we help people set up websites. We do video. We do audio. We do custom shots. He says, if you want, somebody, kangaroo suit going down the Great Wall of China, carrying a wallaby, we'll get you the picture.
Great visual, by the way.
And he says, what we do is, he says, we built a system using some of our technologies, some other technologies, and we pointed at prospects' websites, and it does an analysis of them. And it can tell you how much is video, how much is audio, by the way, are the pictures from us or a competitor, how much is text, and it grades them for that. And so it gets back again to the different discussion where the salesperson's calling up and saying, Victor, tell me about your website. It's, no, Victor, let me tell you about your website. And you're going through and having this discussion, and you're helping them say, if we did this and this and this, we think it could get higher web traffic. We think we could lower your cost of search. We could do a lot of different things on these things. And I think that's really kind of some of the new power that's coming down the road, where it'll just be a different kind of conversation. But you're exactly right. AI is there to augment. AI is great at number crunching. AI does not have judgment. It's not like Data on Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's like this is the real world. So you've got to apply my judgment along with the number crunching, because it's going to cream any PhD in mathematics. AI will cream that person. But if you can't apply the judgment, you're not going to have the full power. So it's the combination of the two, as you just brought up, that's really going to be the power going forward.
You're blowing my mind with a couple of things here already. The Wallaby one was really one of them. No, joking. What does that mean for the future of, a sales leader? Like, let's say the VP of sales almost seems now like an antiquated term. I'm not kicking him out of the building yet, but it's almost like, the new sales overlord has to have a grasp of marketing, obviously sales, but also what's happening with the AI and the enablement platforms to really be able to drive their team. Is there the emergence of a new type of VP of sales, a sales operations person?
Yeah, I think we saw, if we just look across the hall at our friends in marketing, we saw a transformation over a 5-year period, maybe 7-10-year period, where everybody was brand. It's all the CMOs, brand, 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 brand. What is it today? Digital, 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 digital. The guys who are saying, we need to sponsor that golf tournament. Man, they're dinosaurs today. So I think you're going to see the same shift in terms of sales is, go out and make things happen to, let's figure out what the customer, how do we work with the customer to make things new and unique. And I think one of the interesting things, I spoke at a sales kickoff meeting for United Technologies. And right ahead of me, they had one of their top reps. And he was explaining why he was a top rep. And he says, I went out and found something to sell that nobody else can beat me with anymore. And I go, tell me more. And he says, well, we're one of the divisions of United Technology does retrofitting of commercial aircraft. So you buy a 787 today, somewhere down the road, you're going to go through a major retrofit, probably several, because you're going to replace the avionics, the nav system, the hydraulics, the entertainments, everything. And so they have a group that does that, and they compete against other companies that do that. Well, this enterprising sales professional sat there and said, there's all this data. Like, if you buy a jet engine from GE, there are, I think, 32 sensors in it that send back a terabyte of data per flight that somebody could analyze. Well, you could also get data from sensors on the hydraulics and the aviation and all the rest, fuel consumption. And so what they said was, let's go to somebody, and they went to Arab Emirates Airlines and said, every time you buy a new plane, why don't you start paying us a per mile flown fee, and we'll do all the maintenance. And by the way, if we decide that we need to schedule it at a better time, so that we'll do the brakes and the hydraulics at the same time, we'll do that. And we'll have the plane be out of commission less time. And so they go ahead and they build this thing. Well, the key thing on it is they got the contract, but when the plane needs that retrofit in 5 or 6 years, there's no competitive bid because United Technology has all the data and they have all the money. So, based on having this information, they went to Arab Emirates Airlines and they said, look, when you buy a 787, why don't you start paying us a per mile flown fee? So as opposed to 5, 6, 7 years down the road where you write really big checks, you just write little tiny checks as we go along. And we're going to be keeping track of all the things going on in the plane. And if all of a sudden we decide, well, we were thinking about doing the brakes in December, but right now we need to do the hydraulics. And if we did them both at the same time, we could take the plane out of service for 1 day versus 3 days. So why don't we just go ahead and do that? And so there really is now a partnership together working on these things. But think about it is when it comes time for the work to be done, there's no competitive bid. They've already got the money. They've got all the data. And so they've totally changed the whole dynamics of that industry. And I think that's really where, you're getting back to your question, CROs and CSOs need to start figuring out, hey, How do we change the whole dynamics of something? One of my favorite all-time examples was a guy named John Williams, and he would love the way things are today. Because when I first met him, they said, you got to meet this guy because he took his tech company from 700 million to 2.2 billion in 4 years. And I said, it's a tech company. Other tech companies have grown that fast. And he said he did it without adding. So it's not just a 300% increase in revenues. It's a 300% increase in revenues per rep. And I went, wow, that's impressive. And John sat there. When I asked him, I said, the first time I met him, I said, what do you think your role is? And he says, real simple. I wear 3 hats. He says, I'm a visionary, I'm a motivator, and I'm a leg breaker. He says, now I've got to set the vision for where we're going to go long term. And he says, I've got to then motivate my sales team to come along the way. And he says, but if somebody gets in my way, I got to be the leg breaker. This is not an option.
We're going in that direction.
And I think that's it. We have an opportunity to reinvent and turn not only what we sell into a competitive edge, but how we sell into a competitive edge. But we're going to need a different type of sales leader who's going to have that vision of being an entrepreneur and will reward creativity. And it's not just go make calls, make it happen. It's let's work together to figure out how to make it happen. I'm not focused on activity. I'm focused on quality. I'm focused on collaboration. I'm focused on long-term partnerships. And I think that'll be the things going forward that'll dictate winners and losers.
And one of the things at the beginning of the story, you talked about how that sales rep figured out something. I mean, you can't AI that away. You can't machine learn that. You know what I mean? It takes that intuition, that observation, the curiosity to figure that out. I think that's where the salesperson still has a role. Talk to me a little bit about, when you look at, again, the transformation. Have you talked to like smaller companies, big enterprise companies, small companies? How are they going to make this transformation? How are they going to make this change? What have you been seeing when you're working with, let's say, small, medium-sized businesses? What are their challenges?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that are very similar. So, we're not having Dreamforce this year because of COVID. But last year when I did it at Dreamforce, I brought on Legend Boats. And they co-presented with me at a thing. So this is a Canadian company. They make recreational boats, not the huge boats, just the fishing boats, the pontoons, et cetera, out there. But I remember, talking with them, and they called their salespeople memory makers. And I said, that's an interesting term. Why? And he says,
some marketing person. That's a marketing person right there.
Now I was a sales guy. And he sat there and said, when we went out and talked to customers, and they said, tell me why you're a boater. I said, I've always been a boater. Well, why? Growing up on the lakes up here in Saskatchewan, my family go out there. This is my time to be with my dad. I remember going out this one time when we caught this really big bass. And I remember another time going out and it was, a great holiday. And my grandfather was there and we spent the day out they were talking about memories.
Right.
And so I sat there and says, when you go out there, I don't want you talking about the boat and the feeds and the speeds and all that exclusively. I want you to talk about, here's how you could take this thing and make memories with it. Mm-hmm. And so I was sitting there and saying, what's my value add? He says, I want to get people who want to have that great conversation and connect on that human level with this person. But he also said, I want to start figuring out, what are the technologies that I can use to run my business? I've got to have a good visibility into what changes should I be making back to manufacturing for what the next year's line will look like. What about the finance on pricing? Could we do terms and conditions that were differently? And so I think it's this constant conversation that people are having. But as a smaller company, you don't have you don't have to have these huge committees. You can sit down and okay, I run this, you run this. Let's just make a decision. My dad was chief of armor at the Pentagon for years, and one of the plaques on his wall was "God so loved the world, he created it without a committee." And I think that's an advantage of a small company, is that you can make quick changes down the road. But it's still that goes back to the adaptability and agility. It's still going to be true for them. But I think that the amount of data available to any size company is now improving. It's not just the big guys with the big IT departments get access to the data. But you got to have that entrepreneurial spirit, and you've got to put the customer first.
Yeah, it's a reminder of that. By the way, the memory makers also reminds me of the pool industry. The pool industry almost does the same thing. It's all about the memories you make. The small business trying to transform, I think it's interesting because it's got to be a step-by-step thing. Pilot project here, pilot project there. figure out what works, and it's more adaptability and agility in your head. Have companies realized, big companies have, I know this, but when we look at data, you take the plain example for the United Arab Emirates, that's value. Data equals assets. And I think a lot of companies, small, mid-sized companies, still don't see that as a viable, I guess, asset. What do you say about that?
I think, there are a lot of people talking about, what's going on. Gina Rometty was talking about, using the things that, data is the new oil. And I think it is. I think it's going to be the type of thing that there's so much power in information because it allows you to make the right decisions going forward. And I think the key thing on it, we're working with a small startup right now. And I sat there and said, let's go through and map your buy cycle, your customer buy cycle. And he said, well, we haven't sold anything to anybody. And I said, well, do you have competitors in your marketplace? They said, yeah. He says, have they sold something to somebody? He said, yeah. Let's go through and document their buy cycle.
Mm-hmm.
What are they doing with the customers? And I think it's that taking that time to go out and start to get information and start to treat it like an asset and not let, salesperson say, well, I got all the information, but it's on my laptop over here. Well, why isn't it on our shared system where we could go and analyze it?
Right.
And I think that's really the key on these things because, you talk about what's going on the sales side. And we've done a lot of that. I was sharing some of my thoughts with one of my old engineers who used to be the chief product officer at eBay. So all the data scientists reported up through Steve. And as I'm talking about, selling, he goes, Jim, you're not paying attention to one factor. And I said, what's that? And he says, Alibaba. I go, Alibaba? I'm thinking Amazon for China. And I said, no, Steve, I'm talking B2B. He says, I'm talking B2B too. He says, come on over here. Let me show you something. It takes me over and shows me that you can go online on Alibaba on the B2B side that they don't promote so heavily. And you can buy $1 million yuan, or I think it's $330,000 piece of mining equipment on Alibaba.
Yep.
And so it's that thing where, all of a sudden now they're coming back through and they're saying, there are certain things I can do for you. So, I could help you do the needs now. So why don't you come to Alibaba and you start describing your problem. Our algorithms will figure out what the 3 people that should be on your short list is. We'll give you a robust feature comparison of those 3. We'll give you feedback from people who have implemented all 3 solutions. We'll tell you how much people are actually paying for this stuff. And when you're ready to place an order, we'll place the order for you.
Love it. Yep.
Like, wow. And so it's like, will we do that for everything? No, but I spoke at the American Chemistry Society and we were talking about polymers and they were talking about, oh yeah, we sell this in China, online through Alibaba. These things are toxic. They've got all these government regulations and you still sell them. Yeah, we can get away with it.
Yeah. Alibaba's a rabbit hole to go down in terms of products. I did that years ago and I'm like, they're selling everything. I was selling telecom equipment. And you could buy like literally the towers, the antennas, the repeaters, everything. And there it is. It was amazing.
And so I think that's, there could be a thing where smaller companies could say, can I utilize something like that to get started, where they've got the power and they can give me eyeballs and things like that. But it's going to be this balance too, because I don't want to totally get, separated from the end user client.
Right.
And so it's an interesting time today in sales.
Yeah, I think where the algorithm is going, and you're alluding to it, you're just pointing to it directly now. You're confirming what I thought. I mean, but you just got more detail, and that is customers need help making complex buying decisions. And if the algorithm can help them make those complex buying decisions, that's what people want to buy. Access to that algorithm to help me make the buying decision, to guide me. Is there companies who are really going after that? What do you call that? The meta? You call that a meta product, or it's a meta on the product? I mean, what are people doing out there today to actually help people make buying decisions? What have you seen?
I think there are things like, Tom Siebel's not so new company, C3 AI has been around for a while, but, they're starting to say, could we have data aggregation as a service and go gather all of this information about an industry and start making it available to, manufacturers, make it available to, distributors and really start to say, here's information about what this marketplace needs. And I think that's going to be very, very powerful going forward, is that I would pay a ton for somebody else to go out and do the work for helping me understand where should my product be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, based on getting feedback from what you're doing. And, there's a concept in AI called the digital twin, where I could have an airplane of today, I build a digital twin, but I start playing around with this thing for what the 797 ought to look like down the road. And it doesn't exist, but it's something, Boeing doesn't just build the airplane by themselves. They get the jet engines from somebody, they get the avionics. So everybody could be playing with this digital twin and making, tweaks on this things where my CAD CAM guys are doing something and your CAD CAM guys at another company, and it sees that we could help each other and it gives us suggestions, or it says, hey, you're going in opposite directions. But when you think about that kind of technology now where we're all linked together in this process, how does somebody beat out the incumbent? If I'm doing the jet engines, how does somebody come and usurp me? Because we've got all this data that we've been sharing for the last 5 or 6 years on the existing plane. Don't you think I'm going to be in the better position in the catbird seat to build the next one? Because I know what we should have been improving. Right. And I think that's going to change the whole dynamics of these consortiums coming together, that once they're there, it's going to take an act of God to separate them. Somebody's going to have to really, really screw up to be separated from the mothership.
Yeah, they're like entangled like a Gordian knot. You can't pull it apart. It is what it is. So bringing it back down, tying it a little down, because that high level stuff is just wonderful, what's happening, the dynamics. I'm a sales guy because I know people listen to this podcast are salespeople, right? B2B or B2C. I'm a salesperson, let's say B2B. What should I be doing, Jim? What should I be doing? Knowing everything you know about the digital transformation, AI, everything that's happening in the market. What should I do? I'm coming fresh out of college, for example, or just 1-2 years in the industry. What should I be doing, Jim? What should I be learning to stay valuable in the market?
I think one of the key things on it, and we do a lot of speaking. So I work with the University of Colorado with their sales program there. I've done some stuff down with Howard over at University of Texas at Dallas, their sales program. A lot of time when I'm talking to students, I sit there and say, the best thing you can ever do is learn everything about the person that you're selling to, about their job. So you're selling to that VP of manufacturing, or you're selling to Ernie, the guy who's on the line, whatever it is. What are they doing? So what's your job? How are you motivated? How are you compensated? What do you want to do? How could I make your life easier? And I think just going in and asking all those questions years ago, God, I haven't thought of this in forever. We did a project with Georgia Pacific. So they're selling 24-pound white recyclable paper. So when in the history of the human race ever going forward, are they going to have an edge? But one of the sales guys will go in and say, what do you do with my paper? And this guy goes, oh, it's really exciting. He says, I get a case of your paper. So there's, 10 reams in it, 500 sheets each. I take a ream of paper out. I slide my hand under it. I pop open the glue and I put it in the printer. And then I put another because I have to load in like 5,000 sheets. And he says, I love you guys, though. He says, why? He says, you got the worst glue. He says, when I run my hand through and pop that thing open, never any paper cuts or anything. And they start talking. He says, well, what would make your life easier? He says, why do you have to ship it wrapped? Couldn't you just ship me a box of paper with 5,000 sheets in it? And he said, so I go back, can we do that? And he says, yeah, we can do that. He says, might cost us an extra penny per box, but yeah, we can do that. So they start doing that. So here's somebody going out talking and becomes that conduit between what the buyer wants and what the company wants to do. Because the company wants to do what's best for the customer.
Right. And again, you can't machine learn that. I just want to keep emphasizing, because people who think the machines are going to take over the world, you can't AI that type of conversation.
But it's to share, is to focus on, realize that I had a friend of mine talked about it. He says, I realized that my sales in were a result of my customers' sales out. And so he says, I needed to help them. They were selling to companies doing distribution things. So I said, it wasn't that important for them to understand my strategy. It was important for me to understand their strategy and then their customer's strategy. And I think that is to do that kind of exploration. Yeah, be an expert on your product. Yeah, figure out how to navigate and do things inside of your firm, but view yourself as a problem solver and go on that. And the second thing is continually master your skills. We call it sales mastery for a reason. My partner, Barry Traylor, wrote a book called Sales Mastery years ago. It was a novel. And he just said, we've got to constantly be looking to get better, a little bit better every day. And I think that's the key thing on this thing is I think sales is going to be an exciting profession going forward. I think you're going to see people that we worked with a company, can't tell you they are a software company, but they said, we want to come up with a 5-step program for salespeople where they can have a complete career in sales, but never go into management. I said, tell me more. This is the way you start off as a BDR, then you become an inside rep, then you become a field rep, then you become a national account manager, but ultimately you become a consultant back to all the other reps. And so they bring you in on big deals. A friend of mine, Joe Batista, had that job. He's now over Dell. His title is Chief Creatologist. And so what he's saying is, what are all the other things that Dell has besides the product we sell that we could bring to the table that would add value to the customer? Do we have relationships with other customers or suppliers or other manufacturers? Do we have patents? Do we have business processes? So he's constantly looking for what else can we do to deepen that relationship. And I think that even at the beginning of a salesperson's career, start figuring out what can I do how can I be of service to you, the buyer, besides just providing you a product? How can I really partner with you? And I think if you go in with that attitude, you're going to stay in sales your entire career.
That's why we'll go back full circle all the way to the beginning. Why I think Mac Hannon's book, written 1970, is still of value, because curiosity will never go out of style in terms of being a sales skill. Empathy will never go out of style. You can have all the technology in the world, but those two elements are always going to be there. And I love the way you say that. Anyway, Jim, let these folks know where they can find out more information so they can really listen to what's in that brain of yours more.
You can go to salesmastery.com. There are a couple things that you may want to take a look at. We've put these things out there just because we want to help the sales profession. So we publish an annual AI for Sales solution guide. The initial one had 20 different products in it. We've got 186 in the current one, just so you can start to get updated on what's out there in the marketplace. And then we did our second annual AI for Sales study, where we surveyed 500 companies, and I biased the data. I did it on purpose because I wanted a third of the people to have implemented AI for Sales, a third to be evaluating, and a third to have no interest, which is not reflective of the market. Implementations, single digits, not interested at all, huge number. Mm-hmm. But just to give people an idea of what's really coming down the road, because it struck me, this is a party you don't want to be late to. CRM, when it first came out, sales process, when it first came out, big believer, but we're used to having first mover advantage. But if let's say I implement, I have a competitor, you're my competitor, Victor, and neither of us have a formal sales process. So I implement Challenger. I can show you that based on 20 years worth of data that I should have a competitive advantage. My percentage of reps making quota should go up. Why? Because my win rate's going to go up. My average deal size is going to go up. My no decision rates are going to go down. And it will stay that way until you do the same thing. And then you can catch up. With this whole idea of this AI augmented selling. So we did a case study on US Bank. I went out and talked to him and I said, you went in and scored 4.2 million customer records in 2 hours. You gave him a number of 1 to 100, and you told all your financial officers, go call on everybody who's got a score of 81 or above, and they had a 234% increase in existing customers' new opportunity conversion rate. I went, wow, great. So a year later, I called up their SVP of strategy, and I said, Kai, I just want to make sure I got the number right because I wrote it down in my notebook. It was 2.34x uplift, right? He goes, well, that's the old number. And I said, what's the new number? He goes 3.86.
In uplift.
And I said, you went from 234 to 386%. I said, what did you do differently? He says, nothing. The algorithms got smarter. Hmm. And he says, they're giving better advice to my people. My people are getting better at following up on the advice. And so just think about it. When I was sharing that number with one of their competitive banks, they said, do you really think we can get a 234% uplift? And I said, that's half the question you should be asking. The other is, how far behind your competitor do you want to be? They're not at 2.34. They're at 3.86. So there's a concept in AI called Breakaway Speed that once we start, we just start going this way. And so this is a party. You could be late to the CRM party. You could be late to the structured sales process party. You will not survive if you are late to this party because you may never catch up. And I think that's the key thing. You may decide you don't want to go into the world of future selling today, but make that decision based on facts, based on not knowing things, because your competitors are going to leave you in their dust.
I love the first move concept. So if you're listening to this, breakaway speed, keep that in mind. You're probably already behind if you're not really studying this. So salesmastery.com, Jim Dickie, I really want you to follow this guy. I really track him. The information he has, I think, is right at the cutting edge when it comes to AI for sales and that combination. And so, Jim, thank you for your time. And I think they're going to benefit from this conversation. And there's so much to be uncovered within the AI space that maybe in a couple of months, we'll do another, you and I, really go deep into AI. What do you say?
Always love talking to you, Victor.
I love it. All right. And that's it for the Sales Influence Podcast. Leave me some feedback on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or wherever you find me. Also, when you get a chance, check out the salesvelocityacademy.com, but also check out Jim Dickie's salesmastery.com. Track us down, find the information, use the information. Technology is changing how we do business. And on that note, I say goodbye, always reminding you, selling ain't hard when you listen to Jim Dickie and Victor Antonio. Take care. See you next time.